Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Elliot Rodriguez and welcome to Facing South Florida. Jim DeFede is off this week. There are nearly 50,000 homeowners associations in the state of Florida. Only California has more HOAs than the Sunshine State. HOAs have been in the news lately for all the wrong reasons. As the cost of insurance rises, HOAs have been forced to raise fees, putting a financial squeeze on homeowners. Corruption is also a concern after leaders of the Hammocks HOA were accused of theft and fraud to the tune of $2 million. Florida now has the HOA Bill of Rights, but critics say its protections do not go far enough. They're demanding a new law that requires independent audits of HOAs and criminal penalties for board members who raid HOA bank accounts. I recently met with members of the Kendall Federation of Homeowner Associations, one of the biggest homeowner groups in the state. I heard from residents who are part of 4 different HOAs in Kendall.
Tell me, what was your experience at the Hammocks?
Well, we observed a lot of issues related to lack of openness, lack of open record requests. When we would ask questions about what's going on in the association, we would start getting violation, abuses towards us, a lot of vindictive behavior. People were losing their homes. So eventually people got scared and just stopped asking questions. Some of us didn't. And we faced a lot of abuse. So there's been a lot of abuse in the Hammocks. It's gotten a lot better under the receivership, but it's a big, deep hole that we're in right now. We're digging ourselves out right
Personally,
now.
how much did you have to pay?
I went from $85 a month to $385 a month. We had about a 400% increase within about a 1.5 year period during that time.
What were you getting for that additional money?
Nothing. We were getting no differences in services. A lot of it would be neighborhood budget increases, and we would have no differences in our neighborhood. Our trees weren't being cut, the paint wasn't being restored from year to year, drains were overflowing, nothing got done. That was under the previous criminal boards.
Right.
Yeah.
And what was your reaction when you found out there was alleged criminal activity taking place?
Well, it explained a lot. We saw a lot of money going into the association and nothing coming back out in terms of services or events that an association would have for its residents. So it explained a lot to us. It was unfortunate, but we weren't surprised by the outcome.
After going through this experience, what advice would you have for people out there who live in an HOA?
Well, you can try. I want to say to hold them accountable, but unfortunately, the state of Florida, through DBPR, there's no teeth in the law. So we went and we tried to go to DBPR to try to get assistance. We got nowhere. We tried to go to our politicians. We really didn't get anywhere. We went to the news. The news helped us get exposure to the problem, but there's really not, even right now, there's not a lot of options. The only option the Hammocks had was to go into receivership, which is very, very expensive, but it was the only option we had.
Well, the legislature just passed a Homeowner Association Bill of Rights.
Well, I helped him with Juan Carlos Porras and a few others. We had about 60 pages worth of ideas, and I think 8 pages might have gotten passed. I don't know the exact number, but it was a much reduced number, and it disappointed a lot of us because we worked very hard on building something that might give us teeth, and at the end had very little. If you ask Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, she had wonderful ideas, and very few got implemented in the final version. It's unfortunate. I guess it's better than nothing, so we're grateful for what we have, but we hope for a lot more.
Have you given up?
No, definitely not. But we know that unfortunately with politicians there's a lot of compromise. So where you start out and where you end up, it's a hard journey.
I'm at the exact opposite end, and I'm very thankful. I've been there since '74, and it's always been beautifully run by a board. We do have annual outside audits. I also think we're just very lucky we elected honest board members. But this is an association that is 1,450 homes, and it's single-family homes, and we have 2 pools, tennis courts, we have a lake, but we have parties. But we've been very, very lucky. Now, when the things happened with the Hammocks, we all got scared. I was on the board for 25 years. It was like, are we doing what we are supposed to be doing? Because insurances are issues, and One year we tried to renew our insurance, and the insurance companies didn't want us to have lifeguards. This is still something that we're debating, because it depends on what insurance company you go to, because if you put the sign up and say at your own risk, theoretically your liabilities should be less, so that's an issue. But our issues are so little. I mean, we are so very lucky, and I think it's, I don't know, maybe it's because we have that clubhouse, that one clubhouse, or the facilities that, and our school, our elementary school is in the middle of our neighborhood. And that makes us very active in the school, which means if you're walking on the sidewalks in the evening, you see your neighbors.
So it sounds like things are going well
Yeah.
in your homeowners association.
Very well.
So what advice do you have for others who live in condominiums?
Number one, and I know it's going to be hard to do, go to your HOA meetings. Go to your HOA meetings, find out what they're talking about, ask questions, pay attention. And if you can't go to the meeting, get a copy of the minutes, find out what's going on.
There's a lot of apathy. So I feel that I am between the wonderful things that are happening at Winston Park and the horrific situation they've been in the hammocks. I used to be on the board. I was on the board for 5 years. Tremendous transparency. A new board took over, zero accountability, zero meetings. We did have an increase. We don't have much. We have a pool, and that's it. There was an increase of $60, which is not a lot, but there was no meeting in order to tell the people, hey, your insurance is going up, this is what's going on. And it's a lot of retribution, a lot of selective enforcement. If you're friends of the board, your car doesn't get stickered. If you're friends of the board, you can say whatever you need to say because you're supporting the board. I am the rebel in the community.
Oh, no.
And I suffered a lot after I got off the board. They came after me with a vengeance. Our community had money. Our reserves were funded beautifully. Our community looked amazing. We had transparency. We had meetings, because it's not my community or the members of the board. It is the community's neighborhood, our community, and that's how we felt. This is not how the board is currently running.
We've seen it all. We've seen some disasters, like the hammocks. We've seen some good, positive situations. Crossings happens to be one of them. And we've seen stuff in between.
Coming up next, we'll hear from Miami-Dade State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle, who says stricter laws are needed to protect HOA members. And later, I'll talk to the state representative who sponsored the HOA Bill of Rights about his plans to pass a new law governing them. Welcome back. Financial fraud cases involving HOAs are complex, time-consuming investigations. The case against 4 board members at the Hammocks HOA took years to investigate before charges were filed. Miami-Dade State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle believes there's a better way to keep HOAs honest. She spoke to CBS News Miami's Joe Gorcho about changes she'd like to see in state law governing HOAs.
Many are good, but they can be like living in a dictatorial state. And a lot of them don't have any feeling of power or control or access to anything that really governs them. So, of course, it's very disturbing. Our office sees hundreds of these complaints, especially since the media has been on top of it. And then everybody starts to say, oh, you know what? I'm not alone. Oh, these are true issues. So what's the problem? The problem is, well, it's multifaceted. But one of the problems is there are lots of rules and regulations on the books, hundreds. You got to keep records, you got to have elections, you have to have an audit, they're on and on and on and on. But what happens when you don't do that? Nothing. Nothing happens.
Did the situation in the hammocks, where the allegations surround the board siphoning more than $2 million from the association, did that change the level of urgency from yourself and maybe perhaps other lawmakers here in South Florida to finally figure out how to get something on the books with teeth to help these homeowners that believe something might be going on in the background have a real opportunity to fight back without spending, like you mentioned, thousands and thousands of dollars going to civil court to try to find some remedy and relief to figure out what's going on with our money and our association.
So now that everybody sees this, it's in the under the microscope, we all see all the problems with the laws. It took years to be able to put a criminal case together. It's the second largest homeowners association in Florida. It's like a city.
Stealing has always been a crime, though. If you steal money, you take money that you're not supposed to be dealing with, or you're moving money in some sort of way. That's always been a crime, but it sounds like because it's so hard to be or force people to be transparent within these associations, is that where some of the reforms you're looking at to force transparency in a more meaningful way so your office and other law enforcement entities can really figure out what's happening within this association when a complaint comes to your office?
On all counts, everything you just said is exactly right. We need transparency. I believe that those homeowners are entitled to that. They have a right to know how their money is being spent, how much of it's being spent, is it being spent in a reasonable and prudent way. The problem is that if you don't get access to those records, it's just pie in the sky allegations. One of the things one of the grand juries did suggest, and I think it makes sense, we have so much online these days. Everything's online. You can Google anybody in any place. And so why can't homeowners have access to the invoices, to the receipts, to the payments, to the assessments, to what the CPA may have said about what the audit is? And not just them. What if I want to buy one of those units? What if I want to rent one of those units? Why shouldn't I know the condition, the cost, the reasonableness of the process of either home ownership? That just all makes sense to put it online and make it transparent for everybody.
What should the penalty be if someone doesn't want to comply with everything you just said?
I think you can have staggered penalties. You can have, first of all, you have to start with teeth in the law, right? Teeth in the law on all the things that we just said, and then someone to enforce it. You can have administrative teeth. You can be able to go in and do something meaningful during an election other than saying, I can't do anything, I'm here, I'm just here watching, which is unfortunately all DBPR is really empowered to do. So if DBPR is going to be the enforcement agency, you need to do a couple of things. You need to give them laws that have teeth, so they have administrative consequences against those bad parties at the, taking over the elections and so on and so forth. If that doesn't work, then you have to also have criminal penalties. After a certain point, you can't make everything a crime, every transaction. But if you can have access to the records, which is the key, if you can have access to those records, whether it's homeowners, whether it's DBPR, whether it's police agencies, whether it's FDLE, whether it's assistant state attorneys or our own investigators, once we have access to those records, we can better ascertain exactly what happened to the money, where did the money go, or was it completely spent legally and legitimately?
And my understanding, again, listening and piggybacking off what you said, that right now under the law, someone from a board administration, if they got voted out of office, they could, in theory, destroy any administrative records related to finances, is that right? Without any sort of criminal penalty associated with it.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
You can destroy anything you want without any kind of penalty. That's the problem. Not only just criminal, but there's nothing administrative. You don't have like a license they get to take away. There's nothing. Nothing happens when you don't do what you're supposed to do.
You can shred years worth of finances and documents within an association and nothing happens.
Yes, that's right. That's part of the problem. So it's kind of like you're hoarding this information, this evidence, from everybody who needs to have access to it. Whether you're a homeowner, whether you're a suspicious litigant, whether you're a suspicious investigator, it's all right there. You can destroy it. You don't have to give it to anybody. It's not transparent. You can't have access to it.
I believe, my understanding is that there was a law that was put into place, some of your efforts on the homeowner side to tighten up elections. What did you push for? What's in place right now that has kind of changed the game a little bit on the election side for homeowners associations?
Well, we'll say this. I think one of the things that we were disappointed in last session was we really think there needs to be an alignment. Everything there were better rules there were better laws that were passed for condominiums. We also wanted homeowner protection under HOAs. They separated them out. I think that's a bad idea. I think the lawmakers know that we think it's a bad idea. We really want to see alignment so that elections, transparency of records, record keeping, failure to turn over records, that all of these things will have built-in consequences.
What are your biggest fears moving forward if nothing changes and the status quo remains and there's no real accountability for those that destroy records, failure to be transparent with the documents within the association, don't hold elections, commit election fraud at these boards and associations throughout the state of Florida? What's your biggest fear if nothing gets changed in law?
We have to change it. There's no other option. The law has to change. We have to institute enforcement mechanisms and powerful laws that can be enforced.
That was Joe Gorcho reporting. When we come back, I'll talk to the sponsor of the HOA Bill of Rights, how he's planning to put more teeth into the law that many believe was watered down in the last legislative session. Welcome back. I'm Elliot Rodriguez in for Jim DeFede this week. The HOA Bill of Rights took effect October 1st, but the law was just a shadow of what freshman Florida lawmaker Juan Carlos Porras initially envisioned when he proposed the bill. The state representative from western and southwestern Miami-Dade County wanted to give more power to the Florida Department of Professional Regulation to investigate suspected cases of wrongdoing at HOAs and condo associations. However, the funding for increased enforcement was stripped from the bill, rendering it powerless. When I talked to Representative Porras, he told me he isn't giving up and plans to introduce a similar bill when the legislature convenes in Tallahassee next month. State Representative Porras, first of all, thank you very much for joining us on Facing South Florida.
Thank you so much for having me, Elliot.
You were the sponsor of the HOA Bill of Rights in Tallahassee, and I have to say you really struck a nerve with this issue, because whenever we do a story about problems with HOAs, our phones just go crazy with complaints and people who have suspicions or are wondering what's going on with their HOA. Now, when you sponsored this Bill of Rights, I'm sure you were hoping to accomplish more than what you finally got in the bill. Is that safe to say?
I do think that's safe to say, although I will admit, I think we passed one of the largest HOA packages, I think, in the past 10 years. You know, before my time in the legislature, I think the issue was not looked at as much as before. And sadly, it did take something like what happened in my district, like we saw in the hammocks, and many other parts of South Florida, to really get us to this point where the legislature is now starting to see this as a priority, and our delegation is really starting to pay attention to this.
All right, well, tell us, what were the key points in the bill that you originally filed?
Absolutely. So in the original bill, I worked very closely with our state attorney, Kathy Fernandez-Rondo, who's been fantastic, and several members of our community, including the mayor. It had a statewide task force to handle the enforcement of some of the HOA law that we had in place. Sadly, which is not really up to par at the moment with some of the laws that have to do with condominiums. And the legislature, when these laws were made, it was a very different time. But I think now, we're starting to play a little catch up in how some of these laws and how these HOAs really, practice their day to day.
Your original bill called for enforcement by the State Department of Professional Regulation, correct? And also criminal penalties for HOA members who commit wrongdoing. Those penalties were taken out of the bill. What happened?
Right. I mean, a lot of the penalties are still in the bill. We do have criminal penalties for a lot of these election crimes that did not persist in the law previous to that. And the governor did sign into law criminal penalties for what we call kickbacks, which is when a board member or someone in an association does take money for say a contract or a maintenance fee, which was something that I was very passionate about. I would have liked to have seen the penalties a little higher. At the moment, the Senate and the House agreed to a monetary fine, which I would like to see that at least to a misdemeanor or a felony, and I'll be looking to try to bring that back next year. But it's just one example of how many things are not looked at in the law at the moment, and how the lack of accountability that we have when it comes to these homeowner associations.
How common is selective enforcement and harassment in HOAs?
I think it's very common. I think you see that in the majority, if not, most, and not just in South Florida, but in most of the state. I mean, it's a grievance that I get in my office, many times a day. Many of which, many of these HOAs have very unclear laws when it comes to the process of how they issue fines or certain rules that they may have. And I think a lot of people feel that some people are taking more drastic consequences than others in this scenario, but I'd say it's a statewide issue.
What can the average member of a homeowners association, a resident or an owner in one of these associations do to protect themselves, to make sure that the money that they're paying in fees, which they see going up and up and up, and with insurance costs, a lot of people are seeing very large increases. What can they do to protect themselves?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the best thing to do is to stay active, stay as involved and as informed about your association as possible. Obviously, it's very difficult for some people in our lives, obviously with our work, but going to these homeowner association meetings, asking for these budgets, going through them and making sure that the money is supposed to be where it is and it's being spent appropriately is one of the key things that I tell people day to day. Obviously, there's only so much that government can and will get involved in.
Would you favor a law that requires mandatory outside audits of homeowner associations, whether it be once a year, every 2 years, or every 3 years, that they're mandatory audits conducted by an outside firm?
I would say, dependent on the size and the population, I would say yes. Obviously, we're talking about essentially multi-million-dollar organizations, which are some of these HOAs. Their budgets sometimes are in the multitudes of the millions, and yet a lot of these people do not have the proper training or the proper qualifications, in my opinion, to really handle some of these budgets.
So what is your next step now as you prepare for the next session?
Absolutely. So I think a lot of it has to do with funding. Obviously, enforcement costs money. And while, condominiums have DBPR and somewhat, HOAs don't have that. So I think we're gonna have to start to get creative, especially with some of these trust funds that maybe condo owners have, or somewhat to the sense of having what condos have with DBPR, some kind of enforcement, and making sure that HOAs or residents in HOAs at least have an office or somewhere to call for these issues, and to make sure that if there is some kind of procedure that we can have with people when it comes to these criminal complaints, or when it comes to finding them the right information, that we have that in place. And that's something that I'm looking forward to for the following session.
I will say, Representative, you are leading the charge when it comes to reforming HOAs. I thank you for joining us on our show, and we'll be continuing to cover this issue.
Thank you so much.
Porras told me HOAs have enjoyed too much freedom over the years. He believes it's time to scale that back. In the meantime, he wants individual HOA members to get more involved in their local associations. We'll be right back after the break. Thanks so much for joining us. Jim DeFede will be back here next week to host Facing South Florida. I'm Elliot Rodriguez. I'll see you during the week on CBS News Miami at 5, 6, and 11. Enjoy the rest of your day.